Hey there, ladies and gentlemen, is the Economancer back once again. Yeah, I'm doing a quick video here covering part three of Corruptibles. This one was a little bit more difficult to walk through. And I want to start off with an affirmation of something that people should take serious. And this is for anyone who's in public policy, politicians, etc., about how we ought to act in the world. So, first and foremost, I don't think that we should use nudges to motivate and change the way people act, say, do, or anything along those lines. And the idea here is that the psychological processes of behavior and stuff like that should not be manipulated by people, because those who manipulate it, they go against the liberal ethos, right? Because what it does is it envisions the person who's making the policy or who's motivating the nudge, that they know more or they are more moral than those who are there trying to change their mind. A good treatment of this is, think of it this way: I'm going to try to use nudge theory to change the way you purchase insurance, right? So by signing you up already for your insurance, I've made it harder for you to not choose to get insurance. Now, what that does is that limits you from understanding that they've manipulated you, which means that you, by and large, think that you are more correct than the other individual. And I find that to be highly wrong. Now, we're going to jump into the book. All right. So we had just gotten through the hyenas and all of that, and went into this major issue about cannibalism and stuff like that, and about how power facilitates or makes things worse for those, or who's attracted to power. So now we're going to be going into this next part. All right. So it's from Maori teens to M113s. And if you're not sure what that is, an M113 is an armored personnel carrier used in places like the battles against the Viet Cong, against insurgents in in Iraq, and some of the Taliban of Afghanistan. And so the central thesis of this is that, hey, we have this police force and they're like highly corrupt. And the reason they're highly corrupt is because they have the ability to be corrupt, because we have this police force that wants individuals who want power and who are more than willing to abuse that power. Now, he does, walk it back a little bit and being like, hey, it's not all police officers, it's only a select few. And he points to the George Floyd horrific incident, and he's like, hey, this right here shows that there are people in power that, under all circumstances, are mostly just a net negative for society, which, very well may be true, but the extrapolation is that the next step we need to set up a system where these people can't get any power. So we have to use propaganda and nudges so that we can limit people like that from coming into power. And by doing that, we've made the world a better place, which doesn't really actually answer the question. It makes it worse. Because here's the issue. We don't know, one, if it's because people have certain predilections towards violence, which is what makes them police officers, but he definitely motivates that reasoning. And he points at New Zealand versus the US. And he shows the differences in how New Zealand tries to get police officers in their advertisement, right? He shows in the US it's like there's a small town of like 500 people or something like that. And they have this this video of you know, the SWAT team jumping out of an MRAP, and you know, they're out there, they're like clearing rooms and doing all cool guy stuff, tactical, and they've got this Punisher logo, which is an argument that I love when people make, that Frank Castle hates police officers, which isn't true. But and then he shows the commercial of like New Zealand, and it's, you know, it's a person, they're like they're like running through, and they're like they're making basically jokes about being police officers, and you know, they're like helping a cat out of a tree, or they're chasing down what you think is a criminal, but when they get there, they're like, hey, you dropped your purse, and they hand it to them. You know, kind of the subversion of expectations that we get from modern media. And he's like, look, you know, this shows that we've had less incidents of violence in New Zealand when it comes to police officers, and you know, they're just overall better. But this ignores a lot of the cultural content associated with America, because America is a much, much more violent culture. Whether it's the inner cities, whether it's the backwoods, or the trailer park, whatever you want to, you know, design to show that there's high levels of violence in the U.S. There are high levels of violence in the U.S. That's just the nature of the beast. So if we want to go down this route of like, oh, look at all these police officers, we need them to be like super happy-go-lucky, kumbaya kind of stuff. I mean, we start to miss out on this important function of police officers, which is retributive justice. And if you lose retributive justice, then what? Then what do you have? Because now you're at a point where you're going to have this onslaught of violence that's only going to get worse and worse over time, because the whole purpose of retributive justice is that it limits the amount of injustice in the world. Because think of it this way, it's a cycle of violence. We have person A and person B. All right, so person A hurts person B. So person B person A hurts person B, retaliates, so on and so forth. And we have this cycle of individuals, groups, especially if you add like group dynamics, where there's this never-ending violence because someone had done something to someone else, and you know, well, I've got to get even, and then, well, they did this to me, even though it was in response, I've got to get even because, you know, maybe they attacked my sister, or you know, something like that. And so you need a third party that intervenes in that, which limits the amounts of violence on both sides by being the arbiter of that retribution of justice itself. And when we get rid of that main component of the police officer, we do it at the risk of, you know, making violence actually worse in the system, because there is no true retribution by a third party that doesn't have interests in either A or B. And because of the level of violence in the United States, we're going to understand that the police officers who work in the United States are going to have to be able to respond to that violence much more. Then he goes into this argument about, you know, the militarization of police. Now, I understand that there is a problem, and I agree that there's a problem with the militarization of the police force in the United States. But me and him probably have very different reasonings for this. He points to the actual military personnel, so the GWAT guys, so that's Global War on Terrorism, entering into the police force upon leaving the military, and that this is the cause of the high levels of militarization of the police. I actually disagree. In fact, there is no reason to believe that it's the military. You would assume that the military is far more disciplined, far more physically fit, so they're less likely to need to use the weapon, far more likely to be able to use their body to fight, and all of these things. Whereas your average police officer probably doesn't have that same level of discipline. So they're more likely to use lethal force. Next, the culture that the military has is very, I guess you could say, like pro Second Amendment, pro Constitution, especially, surge and pre-surge military are much more likely to be a part of that nature. Whereas police officers are probably not going to have the same nature. Now, why does this matter is because the argument again is that these police officers are bad and they're the reasoning we're having so many ills in our society. Despite the fact that he admits some of them are good and some of them are bad, but we have this problem of militarization. But I think for the most part, I think that's pretty easily debunked by what I've kind of laid out about the discipline and about the limiting factors and being more closely aligned with, I guess you could say, monarchist values by being more closely associated with the Constitution. And why we shouldn't really follow the New Zealand model is because, well, we have higher rates of violence. We need to fix the culture before we try to fix the police force. And then manipulating those who would enter into the police force. So those who would not want to abuse the power versus those who are going to abuse the power doesn't actually bear out empirically, because we don't know who comes into the power yet in this model that he's making, because we don't know if it's those who come into power are going to be corrupted, or if it is the power, or if the power attracts those who are corrupt. And this kind of leads you to believe one side of the argument without the other. And if we think that power corrupts, then it wouldn't matter who you got as a police officer. If they're under a certain power structure, they're going to be corrupt unless they're held to a standard, and that standard could be borne out by the militaristic enforcement of the law through high levels of discipline. So it doesn't fix the problem. And then, here's the problem. Okay, one of the difficulties of police reform: to fix policing, you need better recruits, and to get better recruits, you need to fix policing. But is there evidence that there is a fundamental issue in the United States with policing? He makes this connection to like London. Oh, well, look at London's police. London is a terrible, terrible place to be. I don't know anyone who wants to be there. There's high rates of violence. You're going to get acid attacked. You're going to get stabbed. They may not have guns, but they have, other really big issues. So London versus New York. New York has lower crime rates than London. I think it's still true, despite the fact that the United States has had a really huge explosion in crime. And there's some work on this about the differences between strain theory and opportunity theory, and about the differences of police interactions because of the different crimes that are going to be committed associated with COVID-19 and lockdowns, and about how that plays out with how the police force has to interact and what that manifests when it comes to crime rates. And that might be a good reasoning behind the growth in crime rates in the United States. So moving on past this, all right, New Zealand tackled the problem head on. They focused on the equivalent of the invisible planes in Germany, the invisible desirables who weren't applying for the job. As a result, New Zealand has one of the most effective and least abusive police forces on the planet. Only 21 New Zealanders were killed by police between 1990 and 2015, an average of 0.8 deaths per year. If you scaled that rate up just for the much larger U.S. population, you'd expect American cops to kill about 50 people per year. Instead, in 2015 alone, police officers in the United States killed 1,146 civilians. Perhaps America could learn a thing or two from New Zealand. This is an apples and oranges argument, right? Of those 1,146, how many of them were completely justified by the police's interaction with violent criminals? If a criminal pulls a gun on you, are you to try to talk them down? Is that the goal here? Again, when we control for the rates of violence, America actually has a lower level. That's if you control for the rate of violence in the population and not just control for the size of the population. So there you go. That's a fundamental error in this. All right. So then we go to this Arizona autocrat, and basically it's an attack on the homeowners association, which I am by no means a fan of homeowners associations. I think they're just awful. But I don't think you can make the argument that the HOA, they get this power and then they get to abuse that power because how it goes down. Are there people in HOAs that are going to abuse power? Yeah, but here's kind of the issue with all of this, right? All right, when you go to an HOA, guess what? You sign a contract that says, I will do what the HOA tells me because I want to live in this community. I want to ensure that the collective efficacy of my community is to such a standard that it benefits all who would live near. So, are there people who abuse this power? Yes. But at the same time, you willfully give up your ability to complain about it because you signed a contract that says, hey, I kind of want to give up some of my quote unquote freedoms so that I can have this really awesome place to live. And I think it behooves of everyone who thinks about joining an HOA to not do it. Because again, I don't think it's useful, but at the same time, I get why it's there. It makes sense. And how should you fight against the HOAs? I think you should, tell them to get bent or, whatever you want to say, because HOAs are stupid. Anyway, that's really the juxt here. So here's my, in sum, this dude is a liar and a charlatan. Reference but no citation. That's wrong. Inferring without evidence, possibly. False equivalency, left and right. Just bad arguments. And the false equivalency here is made up about how the tendency of power, you can counteract it as the New Zealand police force realized. You can do that. And then we can have these promotion mechanisms and recruitment and retention and all of these nudges that we can do. And we can use it to have people wield power effectively. And that we have these political parties can approach people in the community who could become good leaders rather than waiting for people to put themselves forward. Again, how do you do that? Hey, you got to. You're a good person. You must do it. Don't go to the church. Don't become a priest or something along those lines. Don't worry about charity. You go into politics and ruin your life on that. Then he's like, how do we create incentives that keep people from being neighborhood despots and get these better incentives to recruit people who want to do the job for better reasons than to harass people down the block. Again, it's making this generalized statement that there are cops that just want to harass people. And then finally, it's not just about attracting different types of moths, but also attracting more of them. Okay. The more you have fluttering around power, the more you can zap the corruptibles and be still left with the incorruptibles. But there's no competition when whoever reaches the flame first gets to control others. Well, when you're more likely to be stuck with a power-hungry tyrant obsessed with palm fronds and haunted by flamingos. So that is chapter 3. You can see kind of the idea that we want to create this situation that brings more people in that are actually dealing with power the right way. They're incorruptible, which again, we don't know that there are people who are incorruptible. This is an assumption that's not borne out by any level of the facts thus far. And ultimately, I think it's mostly nonsense about creating these different types of police forces, that we should do X or Y without noticing the fundamental differences in the society and the culture around us. And I think it's just absurd. So with that is the Economancer. I hope you enjoyed watching me play Grim Dawn. My camera, the new camera that I had, it's broke. So some of these videos might be this way. These videos are a little bit harder because I'm trying to stay on task and I'm trying to play the game. I haven't figured out how to do it where I can, take a video and play the game and then do the script because I don't have a script. So yeah, trying to think of all this and then not die on here because that would be rather embarrassing. I have to like restart the whole video. It's like, wow, you suck at this game. What's wrong with you? And then trying to remember like half a chapter off the top of my head and come up with counters and counter arguments and stuff like that. But I should start working on getting a new camera pretty soon. I don't think I'm gonna get like the Walmart 2K camera again. I don't like the camera anyway. I don't think it works very well. But yeah, so Corruptibles Part 3, didn't enjoy it. Or Chapter 3, Part 2, didn't enjoy it. I think he made a lot of false arguments. There's not a lot of evidence to support many of his claims. It's just how do I say absurd without trying to, invoke something negative about him as an academic. But that's where I'm at right now, that I'm really bordering on a lot of the arguments. Same with Big Dirty Money by Jennifer Taub. It's a book that's building a reference so that it can attack a certain political party. And yeah, I just find it absurd. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Like, share, subscribe. Tell me how this goes. For future, there's going to be some videos that are coming out soon that are going to be interviews with a lot of different people on different topics in economics and sociology.